Well, hello, strangers. Happy Halloween. Today, I bring you a very special story. One from a guy that I met on deployment. He wasn't aircrew, wasn't part of our squadron, but we stayed in touch after. And when he stumbled upon my social media and saw that I do spooky stories, well, he felt inspired to, send one my way. And I will tell it, because I think it's important to. But it's definitely the kind of story that, well, happily, Halloween allows you to wear a mask. Oh boy. Today we're serving up a spooky story and a spooky little snack. It's story 377. And here's what happened. It all started when I was working this dead-end job in a mall. As far as jobs go, it fit the bill. It occupied my time, gave me a steady paycheck, and the owner allowing me to do basically whatever I wanted. I had full run of what we ordered, even if most of it was cheap crap, because cheap crap sold. I like to take pride in how I presented everything, just so. Other than that, though, it was really nothing special. Humdrum and boring, which I think is why she stood out, like a flashlight in the dark. She was new. I could tell that right away. Now, I live in a large city, so it's not like I would have recognized her from school, but the thing of it was, she just had that sort of look to her. Nervous and shy, eyes all big, like this was her first time in the big city. It was adorable. And here she was, wandering into my store. And I could tell from the way that her eyes leapt and caught onto everything that she appreciated all the work that I'd put into the place. It's always nice to be appreciated for your talents. But then she looked up and locked eyes with me. And I was found. I hadn't even realized that I was lost. But in that moment, I knew. This was it. This was everything. I could just tell. It was the most excited I'd been, well, practically ever. She was the one. And it wasn't just me that felt it. Oh, I could tell. She got the faintest blush on her cheeks. She looked away really quick, and then peeked her eyes back up at me. I didn't blame her. The feeling had me rocking back on my heels too. But then I saw her take a step towards the exit, and I realized that my shy little bunny, well, maybe this was all just too much for her. And like I said, big city. I couldn't chance that she'd slip through my fingers. But see, I was what you'd call underemployed. Stocking shelves in a store in the mall didn't really use all of my faculties. And that meant that I had lots of time to come up with things. And for this, I had just the trick. I grabbed a clipboard that I brought from home with a couple of forms with just a few fields printed out. And smiling, I approached her, first asking if she'd found everything okay. She kind of giggled, ducking her eyes back up and down at me, and then said, "Oh, yes, of course. She was just browsing." Then she motioned to the shelf behind me and said, "Those are interesting." I turned and with no surprise at all saw that she was referring to the vintage mannequin heads that I'd found on eBay. They were from the 1930s. Probably didn't really fit in with the mall core aesthetic, but when I saw them, they were just so classy. From an earlier time. I couldn't resist bringing them in to add a dash of debonair to the shop. I thanked her for her compliment and told her she had quite the discerning eye, and then asked if she'd ever been in our store before. Knowing the answer already, but wanting to softball her a little bit, ease her out of that nervousness. It was okay, Bunny. My heart was racing too. She giggled again. She giggles a lot, and it sounds like bells. And then she said no, she'd never been in there before, and in fact had just moved to town. I smiled and said welcome, but as I did, I saw her dart another look towards the exit. No, Bunny, that won't do. Forgoing any other pleasantries, I merely offered her the clipboard. See, my store had a discount club. You put down your name and a couple of pieces of information, and we'd send you 50% off coupons every other week or so. And then I smiled and waited. It wouldn't do good to push her, as anxious as she seemed. Just offering the clipboard to her, not making a move, waiting. And this is how I know that she felt the same connection that I did. As she glanced down at it, then back up at me, her hand came up, and she took it. She left shortly after, I think maybe a little embarrassed that she'd been so bold as to hand over all of that information to a practical stranger. I liked that wariness. It meant that she was discerning in the company she kept, a good sign, but she needn't have worried. Of all the people in the world, I was the one person who could be trusted with her full name, her mailing address, and her phone number. Now, sensing her nervousness, I promised myself I would take it slow. I waited until my lunch break 15 minutes later before I pulled up her address on Google Street View, just to give myself a taste. It was like an itch that I couldn't quite reach. But, I should have known better. Seeing that little house, looking at each window and deciding which one would be her bedroom, I was hooked, addicted. I could think of nothing else the rest of the shift. And honestly, why would I? Why would you? I'd just met the one, and fate was smiling upon me. That house, as it turned out, was only a quick 40-minute drive from where I lived. That night, I had confirmed what I'd suspected looking at the blurry Street View image. Without a doubt, I knew. The upstairs left window, that bedroom, that was hers. Without a doubt. Time was funny after that. You see, I had a renewed sense of purpose, and that put a spring in my step. But I had so many dull responsibilities that I just had to see to, and they kept me from her. I resented that. And fate was playing with me, testing my resolve. On the night that I finally allowed that I'd waited long enough, I could afford another little treat, another excursion. The store owner made one of his rare visits. I appreciated the man. Like I said, he gave me full run of organizing, decorating the store, and a run at the inventory. That night, he kept me late, guffawing and telling all of his rancid dating stories. I appreciated the paycheck. I acknowledged that 99% of the time the man was unobtrusive. But as the minute hands ticked past, long past my plans, I looked at his smiling, braying donkey teeth, and I thought about ramming one of my mannequin heads into it over and over until both were broken. So strong was my ardor, my fascination to getting to my bunny. Alas, it wasn't meant to be that night. And for a moment, I'll admit it, dear bunny, I had my doubts. The next morning, a Tuesday, a day that I didn't have to work, I realized that maybe fate was looking after me after all. Standing outside on the street, looking up into a window, using my imagination to trace the lines of her face. That was, of course, heaven, don't you worry. But it would have just been too small of a taste to really quench my craving. But what do normally households do on Tuesday mornings? I already knew through a little more research that both her parents worked outside the home. And it didn't take me long to figure out which of the high schools nearby she went to. And as I stood in the vestibule of my bunny's home, I had to laugh. Imagine standing outside and dreaming, when all I needed to do was simply walk upstairs and see for myself. But I wanted to drag out the big reveal, really savor the moment. First, I walked through the living room, and then the kitchen. Unremarkable flatware. Me and my bunny would definitely register for a more elaborate filigree. I helped myself to a glass of water. I'm certain my bunny wouldn't mind, and then I could withstand it no longer. It was like the room where she spent the most time, thinking, doing homework, sleeping, dreaming. It was like it called to me. I walked right up the stairs and walked right to the door that corresponded with the left window in the house. And wouldn't you know it, my instincts, correct. It was my bunny's room. Isn't it funny how love changes everything? What would have been an unremarkable space, full of the bric-a-brac of a young girl, something completely beneath my interest. The fact that it was hers. Oh, I could just feel it. It was like every piece of it was a magnet. But I didn't do anything untoward. I was happy enough to simply sit on the very foot of her bed and take in the room, the feeling of her. Alas, I must have gotten carried away. I don't know how long I was there. I'd only meant to be there a minute, but I heard a sound downstairs, and I looked around the room. The light had changed, and I could just tell it wasn't quite yet the right time to approach her. Not like this. If it was her gait I heard downstairs, I needed to remove myself from her room. Not only was it not the right time, I could just feel it, but I would never expect her to be suitors in her bedroom. I would never put her in such an inappropriate space. I needed to make a quick getaway, but fear not. All of that time spent on Street View had alerted me to both a trellis and a tree. So easy it had to be fate. All it took was jimmying open her window, and I was soon walking back down the street, with my beloved none the wiser. Oh, but it was like before. If I'd thought that just standing outside her house was too little, and that the excursion inside would somehow scratch that itch, how mistaken I was. The itch only grew. I'd meant to wait longer, but surely it was fate telling me the time to wait was over, and it was now time to act. All right, soonest begun, soonest done. I can't do any more paraphrasing. It's starting to make my stomach hurt. We're just gonna have to go back to third person perspective. That night, he did indeed decide that it was time to step up the pace. And what he decided to do was to sneak back into the house that night when everybody was there and reveal himself accordingly. At this part in his email, it got a little hard to read. I don't know if it was shame or if he genuinely just doesn't remember the details. Stay with me. We'll see it through to the end. That night, he returned. Meant to bring flowers, I think. But he said something about feeling like he couldn't even stand stopping at a grocery store to get flowers. He drove over and parked in front of her house. The lights were out, and then quietly, he crept to the back door, the same one he'd jimmied open before. And that's where it gets fuzzy. It had been locked. So he rounded around to the front. At first, he feared the worst, that he'd been discovered somehow, that his bunny had sensed him and was locking him out. But how could that be when she was his one? And then it occurred to him that she was playing hard to get. It was part of a game. And as he'd escaped her room before, he decided he'd climb back up the tree and re-enter it. He could tell it was exactly what she wanted. So he gamely began climbing up this poor girl's tree, all the while picturing what her face would look like. The way that her mouth would slant in delight, the way her eyes would light up when she saw him, her one, at the window. Well, she saw him all right, and her eyes did go wide, but so did her mouth. And he said it was like a demon possessed her, because her mouth stretched open, impossibly open, and she began to shriek and scream. The little bitch! After all he'd done for her, all the dreams that he'd built for the two of them. And here she was, shrieking and screaming at him, making him feel like he had done something wrong. He clambered back down the tree as quickly as he could. As angry as he was, he recognized that he needed to get far away from there, not only because she didn't deserve not one more moment of his time, but also because he could hear her parents coming. As he got to his car, he happened to see another package from eBay sitting on the passenger seat, and he decided that he would leave her one thing to remember him by. Something that both of them had been drawn to, something that she could look upon and gaze on with regret for having rejected him. He unwrapped it and ran back up to the tree, toss it into the tree. And like fate was telling him good job, it stuck perfectly, and then he ran. The next day, another work day. While he knew he'd done nothing wrong, he still approached the mall with, let's say, a little bit of wariness. But he needn't have bothered. No cops visited him that day. Nobody came by to question him as to why and how he'd gone to her house. And ultimately, he wasn't really that scared. I mean, people need only look at him and look at her to recognize that it would be implausible that someone such as he would bother himself with such a silly, stupid little girl. This was a simple case of his instincts misfiring. That's all it was, a passing fancy, beneath him really. Resolved to never lose his head over a girl like that again. But in the mall job, somebody like him would never work in such prosaic a profession. Unless it was meant. Unless there was a reason why he needed to be in this mall at this store. Hadn't he had the brilliant idea of a discount club and designing those little forms? Why, he had. No. But all he needed to do was bide his time. As he stood and looked around his store, looked at his prized mannequin heads and gave them a wink, he recognized his bunny was simply a misstep. But there was no reason to throw the whole game away. Like that Alkaline Trio song, it was the right place at the right time, and it would be worth it. He just needed to wait for the right girl. Another girl. And wouldn't you know it, but that very morning, in walked another sensational beauty, a girl that just grabbed his attention the second that he walked in. This time it was for real, he had no doubt. Well, maybe one doubt. Because as he approached her, his instincts started to jangle a sort of nervy warning, and he found himself distracted even as she took the clipboard, as most of them did. He found his eyes tracing back to the exit, much the way his bunnies had, because he suddenly had the very odd sense that something was wrong. No. Do I get bonus points if I give myself the creeps? But Viola, you might be saying, what happened next? Well, I'd love to tell you. But more to that point, I'd love for somebody else to tell you. See, I post my stories at 3 p.m. PST. Somebody very special has graciously agreed to post part 2 at 4 PST. Happy Halloween. The cliffhanger is but a momentary trick. But head over to the Darkness Diaries and you'll get your treat. Until I see you again, take care, strangers. Does the recipe make sense now? Well, it should, because that guy was nuts.